Aloha and welcome to this edition of Better Government. I'm Aaron Johanson, the House Minority Leader in the House of Representatives of the State of Hawaii. And I'm joined today by my co-pilot, our wonderful floor leader, Representative Beth Fukumoto.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you, Beth, and good to be here. I think one of the things that we're particularly excited about today is just to talk about some of the ideas that we as the Minority Caucus have just to try to make Hawaii a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this package. I think we have a lot of things, especially that would help people improve their quality of life and get people more involved in government. It's been one of the passions that I've had, and I know you've shared, and a number of others, especially Rep. Matsumoto. It's really important to her too to try to get more people involved, especially as young people in government. We need more people to come down here and start paying attention to what goes on. So I think that's, I'm excited about this package because it's focusing on that.
Well, I think it's a particular call for both of us as younger legislators who know that there's really a lot of cynicism out there in the general populace, that people wonder, do they really have a nexus with their government? Is their government listening to them? And does it all matter? And I think that's why both of us as young legislators are just pleased to be here, because it does matter. Everybody does have a voice and everybody should have a say. And along those lines of that theme of empowerment, I think that's really the genesis of the House Minority Caucus package, and what I like to call is sort of the 10 ideas that I think are really going to make an improvement in people's quality of life. Some real things that just are, I think, kind of simple but elegant, and just really practical and pragmatic common sense solutions. So with that, maybe for our viewers, why don't we get into just some of the meat and bones
Sounds
of
good.
it. They've sort of fit in 4 broad categories. So maybe you can discuss, because we're on this notion of participation in government, just some of your ideas that are in that vein.
Well, one of the things I think that we've wanted to make sure that people understand are constitutional amendments. So the House minority currently has a bill that has passed out of the Judiciary Committee, and that would require the Office of Elections to explain the constitutional amendments. And we've seen, especially in this last special session, a lot of concern over maybe the way amendments were worded in the past, and people are never sure. I know for me, until I got involved in government, it was always sort of questionable when it came time to vote. It wasn't always clear, and you kind of have to just
sometimes.
Right, everybody sort of has to Google it. I mean, at least we have absentee ballots now, so you can sit there and Google it while you vote. But for other people that don't do that, it would be helpful, I think, if the Office of Elections prepared an explanation on what the constitutional amendment would do in layman's terms. So that's one of the things that I think we're trying to do that I think could really help. It seems very common sense. I think a lot of people will wonder why we don't do it already, but it'll be a good thing, I think, to help out the public.
Yeah, and I think one of the additional ideas that really is a direct way to foster participation in our government and in our democracy is the ideas of initiative and referendum. Initiative being, if you want to see something on the ballot, a policy change or a law change, you have the ability to do so directly through a petition of signatures. But also say that the legislature makes a mistake and doesn't pass something that's in accordance with what the public really wants. This notion of referendum to be able to decide whether or not indeed that's what the public wants. And I think it really gives people an ability to directly participate. I think both of us feel privileged that we're entrusted with the responsibility of representing our constituents, but certainly nothing wrong with exploring this concept that so many other states already afford to their citizens.
Yeah, we're one of the few states that don't do it yet, and it'd be nice, I think, especially this year, because there's a lot of demand, and as people get more interested in what goes on in government, they're going to want to have more of a say, and this is a good way to provide people an alternative method.
Tell us maybe, one of the next broader headings that are a part of our package.
I think lowering the cost of living is another big one that everybody seems very concerned with. One of the things that I keep hearing from my constituents is they're concerned about the Board of Water supply increases, and a number of the electricity fees, and we have all these fees that we have to pay. And that often comes down to also a lack of transparency and a lack of public involvement and input into the process. So we've tried to come up with a couple of measures, I think, that would help us get the public more involved, so that at least people have a chance to say why it would be burdensome for them. And I don't know about you, but I've sort of had this sense when we talk about bills at the legislature, people don't always get involved and then later realize that there's a problem. And I think the more opportunity we provide to get people involved, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, there's definitely that head-scratching moment when people say, my bills are going up and I don't know why. And it's because it's, of a bill we either passed a few years ago, or because, the administration has the prerogative to just raise them through administrative rules. So I think that really will at least equip the public with more information. Again, this notion of empowering people so that they can improve the quality of their life. What I also really like is one of our ideas to essentially make sure to mitigate the cost of living by ensuring that our tax brackets, income tax brackets, are reflective of what people are actually having to pay out there on the street, in the grocery store, or in their daily lives. So pegging those income tax bracket rates to the consumer price index. How often do you stop by people's homes and ask them, do you feel like you have extra money just to spend? And most people will tell you no. Part of what goes on a regular process at the grocery store or whatnot is when the consumer price index goes up, our tax brackets are not very flexible. So a lot of people on the margins end up having to ultimately, in impact, have a higher tax burden as their dollar essentially shrinks and they're able to buy less. The tax brackets just don't keep up with the increasing cost of living. And I think this is a common sense change that, sometimes we talk about tax policy here and everybody's eyes glaze over. Same in the public, but, it impacts your checkbook, it impacts your wallet, and being able to adjust for cost of living increases, I think is an idea long overdue and worth exploring.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting one, I think, as we try to explain that to people, because initially it's somewhat confusing. Anytime you talk about, like you said, tax brackets and especially income taxes, people are sort of confused. And we've, a few years ago changed the brackets a little bit, so people are still not quite sure what rate they're taxed at. But it's essentially that the tax brackets are going to grow with inflation, right? So that people are not taxed at a higher rate than they need to be. And I think that's going to be an important one too. Those two things, I'm hoping there's a lot of stuff we can do. Lowering taxes, there's all sorts of things that come up, but I think what we were trying to do is just come up with one or two very common sense ideas that people will be able to understand and should be easier on hopefully this building and moving the bills. I agree. And certainly top of mind for most people these days, and really it's a priority for every family and everyone out there, is just how can we strengthen our educational system? And one of the ideas that I think is so fascinating, because most people in my community don't even know that it's not mandatory, is mandating kindergarten. We spent a lot of time talking about the governor's early education initiatives, so preschool, and we certainly dedicate a lot of time in the elementary and secondary education realm. But I think most people out there would be shocked to find out that it's not mandatory that you send your child to kindergarten. So ensuring that there are more educational opportunities for 5-year-olds, that everybody's getting a quality kindergarten education so that they're prepared for the rest of their academic journey. And this is something that we've not done at the legislature before, and people are always surprised. Why are you talking so much about preschool for all if you don't have kindergarten for all? And this is more of an extension of an existing system, right? We already have kindergartens. This is just expanding that so that more kids will have access and be able to attend, instead of having this gap group, which we have right now. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity, because I'm having so many people call me about this pre-kindergarten plan of the governor's that came up last year and his constitutional amendment with concerns. And just that either cost concerns or the doubt of whether or not some of our private preschools, especially in Mililani, the religious preschools, may not be able to receive that funding. And a lot of the preschools...
What are the added impacts if they do?
And a lot of the preschools seem to think that they will be able to receive it, but they don't know what the impacts on them will be, and they don't know that they probably can't receive it. So there's so much confusion still going on, and so I'm hoping that in this legislative session more of that comes out and we'll be able to get more information to the public, because people will have to vote on that this year in the next election. So I would like to see more of that in this session. I needed to take that one opportunity just to bring it up.
Most definitely.
It was right there.
And I'll link it back to one of our other bills. Again, you're bringing up a really important constitutional amendment
Right.
that everybody in the public should be educated about.
Right.
Thus, hence the need for one of
Right.
our bills to require greater information
Right.
and equipping of the public about constitutional amendments.
Right. I'm very concerned that people are going to just vote for it because they think it's preschool for everybody, which who can disagree with? Preschool is so important.
Everybody wants educational opportunity.
We all want that, right? The bigger concern is that it could negatively impact educational opportunity and negatively impact our teachers and our students and our existing preschools and our families. So just making sure, like you said, that people understand the constitutional amendment that's going to be coming up this year, I think is going to be an important thing. So,
why don't you talk about some of the other educational policies that we're looking at in our package?
One of the ones that I think, sort of in the same vein of getting more people involved, is trying to get a curriculum review by the Board of Education. Currently, just the Department of Education sort of gets to determine what the curriculum's going to be. And I'm sure they go through a very rigorous process, and they do, and that's actually the exact word that they use, is it's rigorous. But it doesn't involve the public. It's great in that it involves teachers and principals and a number of other people, but it doesn't involve the public or the Board of Education that's helping to set a lot of the policies. I don't necessarily think that the legislature should get involved in dictating curriculum, but I do think that parents and the community should have a say. So what we're trying to do is just say, okay, after the DOE creates the curriculum, and right now they just said today too that they're trying to go to one statewide curriculum. If they do that, it'll be very easy to just take that curriculum and put it through a review process, just one public review process, so that everybody gets a chance to see what's going to be in there and to get to have a say in what their kids are going to learn.
As they do in so many other jurisdictions who have, school boards. I mean, the school board charged with being the policy-setting entity and, review for the departments of education. It's interesting because it's not a terribly radical concept, but it's so widely employed elsewhere, just not here at home.
Right, and it seems like we've had a couple of different options in the past how we're going to do our curriculum, and we were just talking about it in the Finance Committee today. Should it just be within your own school community complex, and should that be how we decide what the curriculum is? But if the BOE or if the DOE is going to go to this statewide curriculum, then it makes natural sense for the Board of Education to just review it before it goes out there.
Yeah. Anything else on the education front?
I think that's the biggest one for me. We're also going to be putting in an opt-out policy, allowing parents that if they see anything that concerns them in the curriculum, that they would be able to opt their child out of that. And that
Often
it wouldn't
pertaining to controversial issues.
Yes, specifically controversial issues, which ideally would be identified during the curriculum review process.
Obviating the need even for...
Right. But if there's something in there, especially sex education or other things, health things, that they feel like they don't want their kid to be there for, it would allow parents to opt themselves out. Currently, the BOE has a process, but it's not in law. So I think we're just trying to say, hey, let's codify this to make sure that parents always have that right.
Making sure that parental rights are more definitively enshrined in the law.
Right.
I think is what I'm reading from it, and certainly the way I read that bill.
Yeah.
I think we've touched on a few, but also we'd be remiss without talking about our next and perhaps last sort of bucket of ideas under the theme of protecting people, and certainly there's an issue that's near and dear to your heart. I know that's the wraparound process. Why don't you go ahead and elaborate on that for us?
Well, I initially got interested in the wraparound process last year during one of the Connecticut school shooting. And I wanted to see how can we start to address more of the mental health issues in our community. And one of the projects that in various places across the country people have been trying out, it's called a wraparound. And essentially you take somebody who is a patient or somebody who's receiving services for mental health problems, and you wrap them with all the different services that government can offer, but in a way that would be more efficient, so that they're receiving everything that they can get, but they also have somebody sort of guiding them through it to make sure they're doing everything they need to do and taking all the steps they need to take to make sure that when we're spending our public money on these things, that we're getting a good result out of it too. So it's very good for the patient and for the person that's going to be moved through it, especially if they're homeless, if they're an adolescent that's struggling and at risk. it helps them because it's sort of somebody there to hold their hand through the process. But it also is good for the taxpayer because it will help us be efficient but compassionate at the same time, which I think is something that I know is really important to you and is important to me too.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think sometimes we have the greatest efficacy when it's not only it's an effective government service, but when it takes into account, the ultimate effect is making sure that it's, it's a quality service rendered for the taxpayer dollar expended.
Right.
Yeah. And I think what's also an interesting part of the package is something that has been going on at the federal level in terms of a conversation now for decades. A lot of states post 1993, when Congress, in one of the now very rare displays of bipartisanship, passed a Religious Freedom Restoration Act just to make sure that there are greater protections for religious views and practices. It's fascinating when I did some of the research on this, because you just don't see these kinds of votes nowadays in Congress because it's so polarized.
True.
But, when this Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed into law, it was unanimously passed out of the U.S. House of Representatives, so 435 yeses, and it also got 97 out of 100 votes in the U.S. Senate and signed into law by President Clinton. Subsequent to that, the U.S. Supreme Court said that federal law couldn't necessarily be applied to each state jurisdiction, so states have explored their own state version of that particular legislation, and that's what I think we're trying to do as we look at both in terms of scope but also applicability to the state, but just to make sure that we're protecting the rights of minorities and or just rights that are granted through the Bill of Rights to people, and doing it in a common sense way that certainly has existed at the federal level now for more than 2 decades.
Yeah, a 97-0 vote is unheard of. And I think it shows that there are places that we can find common ground.
Right, and unanimous in the House.
Right.
435, it's hard to find unanimity in that
there you go,
number,
okay, yeah.
even in the House. So
yeah.
You're right.
And it's you start to feel watching government now that there's no way you can ever come to those sorts of votes or those types of compromises, but clearly it's possible, and I think that's what we tried to do here with a lot of these issues is just find things, how can this be broadly applicable, but still address something that's really near and dear to a lot of people's hearts right now, and I think every single one of these bills is something that, when you are at somebody's front door, they're going to bring up as something that concerns them.
Yeah, it's an attempt to meet people where they are, to meet their needs in a realistic and pragmatic way with a solution that can actually work. And I think we spend a lot of time in the Capitol, all legislators, debating all kinds of ideas. But sometimes you just know some are more pragmatic than others, and some would just be legislative fiat. But these are actually differences that materially will positively impact people's lives, and many of them are fairly simple to implement. So that's part of what I hope will make them more successful in implementation and execution.
Right.
So that's in a nutshell sort of the 4 themes and the different 10 solutions to help Hawaii. Maybe let's leave our viewers with some parting thoughts here about the upcoming session in 2014, because that's certainly what we think about as we shape the package, and what we aim to do in this next session.
I think for me, it's just, really it's just trying to meet people where they're at, like you said. There are going to be a lot of big issues. Marijuana is going to come up, GMOs are going to come up, all these things, and they're all important things, and they're all important to some people. But just making sure that whatever we do here is going to be helpful to the whole state and is going to really improve the quality of life for everyone. And that, I think, has been what we've tried to do with this package, and that's what I'm trying to do, and I know you're trying to do this legislative session, is just look for ways that we can help as many people as possible.
Yeah. Well, we just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us out there. Both Minority Floor Leader Beth Fukumoto and I really are hopeful that these 10 ideas to help Hawaii will really be a good effort to empower all of you out there, and also to improve everyone's quality of life here in the state of Hawaii. So for Representative Beth Fukumoto and myself, Representative Aaron Johanson, we thank you for joining us and tuning into Better Government. Aloha.